So our next panel here is being moderated by Barbara Robles. Barbara has been a part of this network for a number of years. She's the foremost researcher on Latino wealth. It's not that easy to dig out the data, and a lot of the data that you see comes from Barbara's work. Expert on small business and micro business as well. And one of the co-authors of The Color of Wealth, the story behind the U.S. racial wealth divide. Barbara.
Thank you, Mejia. First of all, thank you all for being here, for taking the time out of your busy schedules. I know that across the board there's folks with they're juggling 10 million things to do, especially given the current situation. So taking two days out to have this conversation and kind of revitalize everybody's passion for this topic, I think is a really important thing, because shared ideas really make a difference. So let me introduce you to the panel. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're going to be talking about, and I think each one of the experts on the panel that we have today actually addresses exactly the breadth of what we want to be talking about in terms of the wealth gap and entrepreneurship in communities of color. On the list is small and micro businesses, but in reality, it was pointed out to me this morning that we should really be focusing on entrepreneurial activity, and that incorporates, a strata of entrepreneurial entities in communities of color. We, like every other community, have very large entities that are quite successful and have a wonderful history. We also have medium-sized that are ready to launch into that, large growth and are amazing at weathering different kinds of recessionary cycles. We also have a pool of small businesses and entrepreneurs that are immensely innovative and give back to the community, are part of the community, and are launching themselves into that medium stage. So really what we've got is a community of entrepreneurship that has no one-size-fits-all policy recommendation. And that's what we want our experts to talk about, the fact that we have to have a variety of different solutions when it comes to building our entrepreneurial wealth that it carries through in terms of the intergenerational transfer of that wealth. We already heard about the different dimensions to wealth. Well, I think one of the things that we failed to document in entrepreneurship in communities of color are the folks that are below the radar. These are what I would call the mini micros. These are the folks that are basically very entrepreneurial because the choice is, do I actually go on unemployment benefits or do I self-generate my own job? And there are a huge number of folks that are frankly not counted in our databases, but they're very, very visible in our communities. And what I suggest is that out of this particular episode that we've got, we're going to see a doubling of this particular category. And what we have to take care with is to actually do the economic anthropology of going into our communities and actually archiving and documenting and chronicling this phenomena. Because if they're not showing up in our databases through the official channels, we need to be able to recognize that this is a phenomenon that's occurring in our communities. And we need to be supportive of these kinds of entrepreneurial activities. People may look at them as a substitute for a real job in the face that there are no jobs, but I also believe that when there are no jobs and you manage to create your own job, you're also providing a signal to the community that basically says, we will endure. We will be active in our own well-being. And that's something that we need to celebrate and document and support as much as we possibly can, especially for those nonprofits serving our communities that see it all the time, but are also not part of that official documentation. So, having said all of that, I think we'll start with Paul Hudson, who represents, in many ways, 3 generations of the entrepreneurial spirit in terms of financial services. He is the president and CEO of Broadway Bank, which is the 4th largest black bank in the United States. And he has, I think, something that is what I would call the intergenerational transfer of wealth, because not only is he part of that generation of financial service entrepreneurs, little did he know that at the dinner table he was probably exposed almost through a process of osmosis of how to actually run a bank and be successful at doing it and be innovative while you're doing it. And that's the intangible wealth transfer that occurs among entrepreneurs at all the different levels that, again, we need to be able to support and to recognize and document. So, Paul.
Thank you, Barbara. I don't know about the wealth transfer. My dad didn't transfer a whole lot, but I did get a bank, so I'm blessed. I don't do research, and I don't lobby, and I'm not an academic. So I'm speaking to you today as a board member of the Insight Center, and I look for private sector solutions. So I'm looking at these problems. Business owners, 90% are single employees, just them. 25% are in concentrated businesses. They're all small, and they all have small revenues, small size, small revenues. And there's really no liquidity. Then you have entrepreneurs, 41% of which are startups. There's really no capital for startup businesses. There is a huge amount of redlining that goes on in terms of credit for those businesses. They often don't have the mentoring, the networking, and the skill sets to be successful. So if I had a chart, I'd have the business owners on this side, and I'd have the entrepreneurs on this side. And I look at it, I look at what's the private sector solution. I'm a banker, so I'm like on both sides of this equation in terms of trying to figure this out. And what came to me was this idea that I'm working with the Insight Center on, which I think is brilliant. So I'm putting that out there right now. It's brilliant. So what I think is needed in this environment is a nonprofit, web-based, small business broker exchange. So what you do is the nonprofit goes to the business person and says, maybe you're 75 and you own a barbershop. What are you going to do? You probably don't have a retirement. You may not have any family that wants to take over that business, and who wants to buy it? Or you may have a restaurant that you've been running with your spouse for 20, 30 years. The kids have gone off wherever they've gone off, and you've got a business. What can you do with that business? So I say the nonprofit could go to business owners and say, I can sell you, I can merge you, I can find a partnership, or I can put you in a consortium of barber shops, and we can purchase wholesale. That's one side of the equation. You say, that sounds good, but what are you offering me? So the nonprofit values the business, and then the nonprofit puts on their website all these businesses and all these minority communities and all these different areas with all these different strategies. And then you go out to these young entrepreneurs that have no capital, that have little experience, and you say, you need a business with a track record. You need a business with historical revenues. You need somebody that can mentor you. And this person needs to sell his business. He can sell you this business over time. The nonprofit can guarantee, like an SBA guarantee with the support of foundations. So, okay, I'm going to sell my business for $200,000. I'm going to sell it to you over 20 years, and then the amortized monthly payment is this, and you're going to pay me out of the revenues of this business that I'm going to transfer to you. You're going to take this business and you're going to blow it up. The nonprofit provides valuation services, financing, structure of financing, technical assistance, mentoring, networking, managing the whole bid process, and takes a fee for the transaction, self-sustaining. Now, the trick is there's investors out there that if it's a bigger scenario, they'll get involved. I'll give you one example. There's a big entertainer in Los Angeles that hooked up with his friend who's a real estate developer, and they got into the barbershop business. I couldn't figure it out. I said, why would you want to get in the barbershop business? They put $100,000 into kind of a hip-hop, modern, cool place to get your hair done for brothers. You know, it's like, and they want to roll these out five a year. To me, it's still a startup. I don't care if they put $100,000 into it. I don't care if it's, Denzel Washington. It's a startup. it's not proven that this concept is going to blow up and that people are going to start moving from Joe Schmo's barbershop to their barbershop. But if they came to me and said, I went through this social nonprofit network and I found 100 barbershops around the country that I want to finance, and I have the expertise and I'm putting up so much money, and I want the bank to put up so much money, and we're going to now do 100 barbershops across the country in Black and Latino communities all around the country, then that's something that the investment community, private equity, bank loans can get involved with, and the nonprofit could be in the middle putting all this together. So there are, I think, private sector solutions that can go along with. The government ought to be doing more with the stimulus package in minority communities, and they ought to find ways to get capital to businesses. But I've been waiting for that over 30 years, and it may come tomorrow, it may not come tomorrow, and I'm very intent on doing what we can with the people we have, including grassroots lobbying, coming to Washington. Nobody keeps us from mobilizing our people and coming up here. They can say, I won't give you an appointment. They say, I won't take your bill. They can say, I won't vote for your bill. They can say, my pockets are filled with financial money, financial institution money, but they cannot keep you from bringing thousands of hundreds of people up to this Capitol and saying, hey, these people vote for you. Now, I know who's giving you the money, but these people put you in the office. So that's just one idea that comes to me through this small business initiative. And one final point, this is a perspective that isn't often at these conferences. The conferences I go to, your perspective is never brought to my conferences. And so if there's some way that we can, I said this in Santa Barbara, if there's some way we could facilitate some sort of cross between CDFI institutions and your organizations, I think it helps in terms of both of our efforts on the Hill and our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Our next speaker is an old friend. I actually met Rudy for the first time when I was at the University of Maryland at College Park a while back. And Rudy is going to tell us and explain to us and also share with us the importance of something that's very close to the housing market as well, which comes back to land and wealth. He represents the Latino Farmers and Ranchers Association, and it's actually a significant population, and he has several years of experience working with different ranchers associations and cooperatives. So, Rudy?
Buenos dias. Thank you, Barbara. It's a pleasure to have a chance to speak with you and work with all of you, and I'm very pleased to be among such smart and well-versed people in academia and in theory. The reason that I'm here is Jerry Pinnick's fault. He enrolled me into this, and but I had it's been really quite an experience in terms of sharing some of the work that I've been doing. I came out of the United Farm Workers Union, and that has led me to take on this particular task, which is wealth retention and building in the farm worker agricultural sector from whence I come. My family are former farm workers. They came from Mexico, acquired land in Texas. We continue to migrate, accumulating wealth through our family work and thereby acquiring additional land. Eventually, this was in South Texas. I joined up with the United Farm Workers Union, helping to organize their operation there. And from there, my family settled in northwestern Ohio. And there I saw a phenomenon unfamiliar, which was that, you know, being farmers, being farm workers, being farmers, it's just a natural transition. But a lot of these farm workers began to acquire land and to begin, and these were farmsteads, which were a combination of their homes and farming, something that they knew extremely well. From my father, I learned not to trust banks. He lived to be 84 years old. He never had, until late in his life, did he put any money in the bank. He purchased his farm with $34,000. It was a 10-acre farm, cash, and he wanted to pay cash for this, which was not tax-wise. It was, but he put that money in escrow, and thereby, paid off the 10 acres. Then we purchased additional items. We had a movie theater in Ransom, Michigan for about 13 years, which my father had lots of fun. That was his thing. He loved movies. But one of the things that I have been doing with that acquired knowledge is working with farmers and farm workers is organized, identifying, because I've learned that with the 2002 Ag Census, the acquisition of farm and the Latino farmer had increased by 54%, and we know that was an undercount. So they had, other than CERS, we had the Rural Coalition, which represents a diverse group of agriculture and farming interests, of which I happen to be on the board of directors, and Jerry is, oh, you're also on the board, right? Am I correct? Yes. So we want to bring some of the knowledge that you have, because we have the need for some of your ideas and some of the work that you're doing. For instance, we have had to basically start from scratch in terms of trying to not just help some of these folks transition from farm workers into farm ownership. We now have something like, in Texas, we have about 1,300 farmers and ranchers, all the way from El Paso down to South Texas, the Rio Grande City. We have also brought into the fold Northern New Mexico Stockmen's Association, which has about 550 cattlemen in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. And a lot of these folks are not, big. These are, a lot of them are subsistence farmers. We have added another element to our organization, which is immigrant farmers. Immigrant farmers, or a lot of them are farmers from Mexico that, the result of the NAFTA policies, had to leave their country in order to be able to sustain their family, because they couldn't even recover the cost of production of raising corn or wheat in Mexico. So, and they have been here now like 15, 20 years. And they have acquired farms, and they're all over. There is no, I'm organizing in Georgia. I'm organizing in North Carolina, South Florida. We are looking at states such as Michigan and Illinois and certainly Ohio, where my family is from. We have now, our extended family has over 7 farms in northwestern Ohio. But if you know anything about the Midwest, you can only farm for about 6 months. And that's, so yeah, you need to have almost a full-time job in order to be able to both sustain yourself, and also sometimes you have to subsidize the farm, because the other element that we're dealing with is contract farming, which means that you contract with either in some of the instances I have had to deal with Cargill, and in fact sued them and lost. But we've done it twice, and we'll do it again in terms of their contracts of adhesion, in which they determine how much it is that you are going to bring your place or your farm up to their standards. And some people have had to indebt themselves up to $250,000, which is a significant amount for some of our farmers, in order to be able to get a contract from Cargill's, Tyson's, poultry, and other things, so that they can then give you we did the calculation of how much time you spend, because farming is a 24/7. I mean, there are no days off. I can tell you that. And some of you how many here are into farming? Any farmers here? Okay. How many of you eat? Okay, so we have some very common. Okay, so it is important for you to be aware, and to either we're going to try to make an effort to connect with you, but you need to connect with us, because we are your natural allies. The predatory lending that has consumed and destroyed a lot of our wealth, some of us, we're family of yours, So we are very interested in doing this, and I work with the agriculture in the tribe and the Intertribal Agricultural Council, and I want to congratulate the new CEO. Where is he? Is he gone? Anyway, sorry, NCAI. I misspoke. I work very closely with Ross Racine, who is the executive director of the Intertribal Agricultural Council. I also work with the Hmong farmers in Minnesota and California. In fact, we are their representative here in Washington on policy. The other thing that might be useful to you and perhaps pursue, and hopefully you have better luck than us, is we have what is called a United States Department of Agriculture and Community-Based Organization partnership. It hasn't gotten quite to a partnership, and in fact, tomorrow we have a meeting to try to see where we're at with that particular partnership. Because we ultimately, those federal agencies, we are ultimate implementers of their programs. And there ought to be a natural alliance in terms of what it is that you do, irrespective of what area you are working on, and us. We used to do it with the community health centers. I was once a director of the policy for migrant and rural health centers, directed a policy shop, and we had a partnership. They provided us funds so we could help them implement their community health center operations. So there is this natural, or what ought to be a natural. I know it's not natural for them. Bureaucrats are very possessive of their powers, but we're constituents of theirs, and we're beneficiaries. So we ought to be. And one thing that I hope that some of you, they call us customers, and I detest it with all my soul. I am no customer of the government, because that takes away my ability to redress any grievances that I have against it. This empowers me, and I think that is a term. It's semantics, but it is meant to disempower those of us that must keep that government responsible to us, as in fact, we're their bosses. So let's keep it that way. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak before you. Thank you.
Our last speaker is Tanya Fiddler, and she is the CEO of Cheyenne River. Is it community? Four Bands. And I wish I had a better bio for you, but unfortunately, I'm hoping that you do some of the introductions about all the enterprise development that you're doing in Four Bands.
Hihane Awashte is good morning in Lakota, and it's an honor to be asked to come up here and speak today. And I'm a little nervous because this isn't the kind of crowd that I usually run with. We're in north central South Dakota, 2 people per square mile, very rural, very remote. But I run a community bank there, and back in 1999, I was going to read you some more of Lakota history in the last 150 years, that we used to be some of the best. We had economies, functioning, strong economies, barter systems. We took everything that we needed out of the earth, didn't ever overtake this overconsumption stuff, wasted nothing. You know, the buffalo, we used every single part. So it's kind of interesting and wonderful that Indian country is included in this conversation today, because I think we have something to learn from each other, especially on the fronts of our values too, on the reservations in South Dakota. Our work in community economic development is Lakota values driven. Honesty, generosity, courage, humility, these kinds of things. And nobody goes without with this generosity. Greed, on the other hand, seems to do terrible things as everybody's watching what happens in the world. But that's not why I came up here today, to go into all that. But I could tell you stories along those lines. Back in '99, when Treasury did the lending study about why there weren't banks in Indian country, access to capital, credit, those kinds of things, it broke the ground for us to have community development financial institutions. The rest of the United States had them in their communities since the 70s, I believe, the National Community Development Financial Institution movement, and it's OFN now. I think they had them there for a long time. When we started at 4 bands, there were 2. Back in 2000, we were incorporated, and there were 2 native banks at the time, and somebody that was doing the necessary training, technical assistance, coaching, support for a growing community capacity to get engaged in economy. So we're kind of new at all of this and watching the trends and things that are going on. I would tell you a little bit about South Dakota reservations, though. I think Jackie started talking about poverty levels. The Dewey-Zebot County is the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation, and Dewey-Zebot counties are 11th and 4th poorest in the country. So of the top 11 poorest counties in America, over half of them are in the reservations in little old South Dakota. Now, that's not the story that anybody, being of this honorable descent, which I am, likes to tell. We get sick of talking about the poverty, the high unemployment. You know, we are 3 to 4 times what anybody else would experience. But it seems like with not engaging in this mainstream stuff, we're kind of ducking a lot of things too. Not that you know, the recession and the things that are happening, people say, how's the recession affecting your communities? And I was like, our economy's never expanded through private sector development to be receding. So we're kind of, you know, not knowing what you're talking about. We've just lived it for so darn long. And I think that's the key with entrepreneurship, that's what I need to be discussing, is that and I'll also caution, and Indian people, we have funny backwards humor, so I'll apologize in advance, but I caution too much government, because that's what we have, government coming out our ears. We've got the federal government overseeing us, controlling lands, because we can't own it. I'm a homeowner, but I don't get to own that. I get to borrow that place and this and that, and you wonder why I'm struggling to put my kids through college because I can't loan against it. Those are the typical equity structures, somebody else owning and controlling everything that you have in Indian country. So the fight back, and then you're wondering why they're poor and wondering why you can't get ahead of things. Well, you're not allowed to. So I've got state governments, federal governments, and the wonderful tribal government, that we are finally making progress within our own communities. And I'm glad that Jacqueline was talking about National Congress of American Indians and the work they do to try to inform tribes, help tribes understand some of the regulation laws, things that we need to have in place so we can counteract, because we're just mocking it or mimicking what we've seen, what we were handed for government structures and this and that. We're just mirroring back all these processes that came into us, that we didn't do it this way. We were communal. We were fair and equitable. You know, it was based on the merits of your character that you were a leader, and the day that you screwed up, you were out. So we're having to reshape these things as we go along. My tribe today, back in January, I've been doing this work in either housing or business development for a short time, maybe 97. But I've been asking for a financial education, financial literacy resolution commitment from my tribe, my nation, for over 10 years. And January this year, they did it. They said, we are behind in promoting all entrepreneurial and financial education activities that can change the systems in the face of our reservation. So internally, we're doing that. You're starting to see it in the language. We've been watching it for a long time nationally and scratching my head, God, why aren't they promoting financial education and entrepreneurship? The ways that we're doing that back home that I should talk about are, we got into it with micro business, and I'm glad that somebody said, there is no data. You know, there's very little data. In Indian country especially, we're very understudied. We are evaluating and studying ourselves and learning all kinds of great things that I think are applicable back out to the broader picture. And whoever would like to visit about that at some point in time would be great. Because we kind of know some things. But this entrepreneurial stuff, we've had business training classes, a loan fund. It's an integrated asset building strategy. If you know First Nations Development Institute, they kind of coined that term way back. So it's not only human capital development, you know, business, education, all those things coming together. We've put out $1.2 million in the last 7 years in microloans, over $75,000 into families' pockets and individual development accounts for asset building, because they do need homes, they do need the educations and the businesses to be able to pass intergenerationally. Dewey-Ziebach County is 80% Native American, and less than 1% of the businesses are Native owned. So that's kind of this disparity and gap that we're working against. But as we've done the work over the years, I saw in the recommendations included in the folder on business development, a recommendation to have entrepreneurial things taught in at least junior high level. We've been pounding our heads and breaking down. It's not a bad pounding. It's just bumping into walls, and this didn't work and that didn't work. And we're desperate. We're desperate to find solutions because we've survived these conditions for quite a long time, which is another great strength and perseverance in our character. But I don't know how long we can keep going, especially as we watch the outside world fold as well now. You know, what do we do? But we've got a movement right now for K through 12 integration of financial literacy and entrepreneurship in our school systems. There's 6 reservation schools. We just had an entrepreneurship fair back in February, moved 1,000 kids through hands-on activities with financial ed and entrepreneurship education. And why is it important? Well, in our 3rd grade classes, we do an exercise, and anybody that does entrepreneurial work knows Consortium for Entrepreneurship Education, Emily the Entrepreneur Doll. It'd be nice if we had a res version of Emily, but 3rd graders all across our reservation write stories, and we started to get worried 2 years ago when the stories coming back with kids having great ideas, and you know, everybody, all little kids want to do animals and pet stores and this and that, and they were going to go to Dollar Loan. They were going to drive down to our off-reservation community of Pierre, South Dakota, go to Gentry Finance, Dollar Loan, the payday lenders to finance their business. They are not aware of mainstream financial institutions, not aware that there's a means to save and do this or that, or they were going to hit bingo. That's another Indian thing, you know, going to bingo. So it made us work even harder. It set our course to stay persistent, get into the K through kindergarten through 2nd grade as well, because there's all of these things that are already in the system, and if we don't start to change perceptions and understanding and educate ourselves within about how these things roll out, the adult population that we work with are in despair, and understandably, and then they're courageous, incredible people that are fighting back every day and making changes and coming into home ownership and business ownership, ta-da, which is what we hope for. But had they known that from the very beginning, you know, had they had an understanding of these means of exchanges, most people on our reservations, 50% on bank, they'd prefer to work with cash. They have a lot of distrust. It's understandable. Those that are in saving now, we do some study in our VITA, our volunteer tax site preparation place, that savings has increased 10%. Our customers that we're working with, it used to be like 1% of people were putting money in savings. Now there's 10%, and they're driven by asset building goals. So long story short, some of the investments we've made resulting in 70-some Indian business people getting an opportunity to start or create something for themselves, this investment in human capital. And usually I'm talking to foundations and always having to plead the case out there to get them to invest in what we do, or with U.S. Treasury and the CDFI fund, which is in good standing right now, which is a wonderful thing, because that's one less thing off our backs that we have to worry about. If anybody that networks, and I'll take cards or information later, with the Small Business Administration, that seems to be in economic development terms the place that everybody in America thinks it's the SBA that does everything, and I'm not knocking them necessarily here today, but I'm saying that they just cannot even begin to understand rural, remote, you know, Wall Street geniuses couldn't figure out how to pull off successful business, and we're learning ourselves through technology uses and those kinds of things how to do that. But SBA, the programs that the DC and everybody on the Hill, minority business offices of what? You're not in the communities, you don't know, and there's a lot to be gained by looking at these human capital building as well as business asset building and those kinds of things. But I'm running out of time. Thank you very much for having me. Pilama yaye.
I hope you get a better understanding of the breadth of the entrepreneurial community and communities of color, because we're not only urban and rural, but we're also about the agricultural sector, which I predict in the next 15 years is going to be experiencing a major revolution in food safety issues, as well as the organic farming movement, as well as much more anchoring among communities. So, questions. We've got time for a couple of them before we arrive, our keynote speaker arrives.
Hi.
Hi, Jerry.
My name is Jerry Pennick. I'm with the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. I want to thank Mr. Hudson for bringing up the idea of a hybrid cooperative for urban businesses. That's a good idea. I guess I would have more of a statement than a question. Is leading up, taking off on what you just said. I think one of the missing elements in this conference is the Department of Agriculture. I think someone should have been here from the Department of Agriculture and from the Senate or the House Agriculture Committee. In February, a $387 billion farm bill was passed. That is probably the greatest wealth-generating department next to the Pentagon in this country, and especially for rural America. It deals with businesses, housing, infrastructure, the whole wealth creation activity. Just a housing example for housing. It has a rural housing development component in that bill. It gives subsidized housing. We were working with one family that were able to get a 3-bedroom house, 2 baths, 2-car garage for $67,000. In addition, they were able to save up to $10,000 in a savings account without affecting that subsidy. Now, there's no limit on how much they can put in the mattress or bury in the backyard, but this is just what they can get in the bank. So that's creating wealth for rural America. That component is missing in this whole discussion. I mean, I think it should have been lifted up a little more if we're really going to talk about wealth creation. And rural America is a big part of that. That's it.
Other questions? Christine.
Around the country, and we also organize good employers as well. And unfortunately, we find in our work that a lot of times entrepreneurs from our communities are terrible employers. They abuse their workers, they don't pay proper wages, they discriminate. Even in our own worker-owned restaurant, we own a restaurant that workers own, a cooperative restaurant. Conflict erupted right before we opened because several of the workers didn't want to side with worker-friendly policies in the restaurant. And so we discovered in our industry that it was super important in doing entrepreneurship and cooperative development that be part of a larger movement for transformation in an industry, and education for employers was just as important as developing entrepreneurship skills. So I'm wondering, in your work in developing entrepreneurship, how do you see that connected to workers' rights issues, to larger issues of social transformation? Because I think we have to face it that not everybody's going to be able to be an entrepreneur. There will be workers, and as long as there are workers and we care about wealth in all of our communities, we need to be thinking about both simultaneously.
Would anybody care to comment?
Well, in my work, I know exactly what you're talking about, because some of the worst employers, or especially the new immigrants, but that have like stores. I've attempted to organize workers in that sector, small restaurants, and they are extremely, and they don't hesitate to get violent if you decide to be too persistent with regard to worker rights. However, in terms of the agricultural sector, we're dealing with family farmers. No, and so hopefully that they're not into domestic violence. But, you know, I couldn't attest to that, but certainly, you know, that's what I'm working with at this present time. But I was an organizer with SEIU and did a lot of organizing, especially Justice for Janitors campaign. And we ran across that quite often, what you're indicating, and we attempted as a union to try to deal with those situations, and it wasn't easy.
I think you raised a really important point, and I wish it were part of our policy about what it means to actually transform a worker into an owner, and what the owner's responsibilities are for a worker-friendly workplace. I think these are conversations that all should be integrated along with entrepreneurship. It's not just about profit, but it's about sustainability and quality of life. I wish we had more time. I'm told that we're out of time, so for those of you that have more questions, please feel free to ask us as we break for the keynote.